I thought I knew everything about the man I'd been dating for 3 years. We talked about marriage, kids, our future together. He introduced me to his family, his friends, even his best friend, Sarah, who was always around. What I didn't know was that every time he kissed me goodbye, he was going home to his wife. And that wife, it was Sarah, the woman who smiled at me during dinner parties, who gave me relationship advice, who consoled me when I cried about feeling like something was missing in our relationship. She knew exactly what was missing because she was married to my boyfriend, and I was just the other woman who had no idea she was the other woman. My name is Jessica, and I'm a 28-year-old graphic designer living in Portland. 3 years ago, I met David at a coffee shop downtown. He was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Our first date turned into a 4-hour conversation that felt like it lasted minutes. Within weeks, we were inseparable, or so I thought. David worked in marketing and traveled frequently for business, which explained why he couldn't always spend the night or why weekend trips were sometimes cut short. He lived in what he called a shared apartment with his college best friend Sarah to save money. It made perfect sense to me. Rent in Portland isn't cheap, and having a reliable roommate seemed practical. Sarah and I got along wonderfully from the start. She was warm, outgoing, and seemed genuinely happy that David had found someone. She'd often join us for dinner, movie nights, or group outings with David's friends. Sometimes I'd catch them sharing inside jokes or finishing each other's sentences, but I attributed it to their long friendship. They'd known each other since college, after all. The three of us developed what felt like a comfortable dynamic. Sarah would often give me advice about David, little things like how he preferred his coffee in the morning or that he got cranky when he was hungry. She seemed invested in making our relationship work, which I found endearing. Looking back, I realized she was probably trying to manage both relationships simultaneously. There were small things that didn't quite add up, but I rationalized every single one. David never gave me a key to his apartment, saying the landlord was strict about unauthorized copies. I never stayed over on weeknights because he claimed he was an early riser who needed his space to prepare for work. Our relationship felt slightly compartmentalized, but David was attentive when we were together, so I convinced myself that everyone had different relationship styles. About 18 months into our relationship, the small inconsistencies began adding up to bigger questions. I noticed that David and Sarah often coordinated their schedules in ways that seemed more intimate than typical roommates. They'd whisper about household decisions, split expenses in detailed ways, and Sarah always knew David's whereabouts, even when I didn't. One evening, we were all watching a movie when David's phone rang. He answered with an immediate, "Hey, babe," before catching himself and claiming it was his sister. But I'd met his sister multiple times, and the voice on the other end definitely wasn't hers. Sarah quickly changed the subject, but I saw her give David a warning look that made my stomach turn. The travel schedule became more suspicious, too. David would leave for business trips that Sarah always seemed to know intimate details about, which hotels he preferred, what time his flights landed, even what he planned to eat. When I questioned how she knew so much, she'd laugh and say they were just really close friends who shared everything. Social media became another red flag. David barely posted photos of us together, and when he did, Sarah was often tagged in them too, as if she was equally part of the relationship. His Instagram stories frequently featured meals, movie tickets, or locations, but never included me even when we were supposedly together during those times. The most unsettling moments were the casual intimacies I witnessed between them. Sarah would absolutely brush lint off David's shirt. They'd share food without asking, and they had a level of physical comfort that seemed to go beyond friendship. When I mentioned feeling like a third wheel sometimes, David would overcompensate by being extra affectionate with me, which only made things feel more forced and strange. Friends started making comments too. My best friend Emma pointed out that she'd never been to David's apartment, despite us dating for over 2 years. Another friend mentioned that she'd seen David and Sarah at a grocery store acting very couple-like, sharing a shopping cart and selecting items together like they were shopping for a shared household. The breaking point came during a group dinner for Sarah's birthday. David had insisted on organizing the entire event, from choosing the restaurant to ordering her favorite wine. Throughout the evening, they exhibited the kind of synchronized behavior that comes from years of intimate partnership. They split the check in a specific way. David knew exactly how Sarah liked her steak cooked. And when she got cold, he automatically gave her his jacket without her asking. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a married couple celebrate with friends, while I was somehow cast as a supporting character in my own relationship. The truth came crashing down 3 months later in the most devastating way possible. David had told me he was going on a week-long business trip to Denver. I was working late at my design studio when I realized I de-left my portfolio at his apartment. I had his spare key, or rather, I had a key that Sarah had given me months earlier, claiming David had made an extra copy for emergencies. I drove to his apartment around 10 p.m., expecting it to be empty. Instead, I heard voices and saw lights on upstairs. My first thought was that maybe Sarah was having friends over. But as I climbed the stairs, I heard David's voice clearly coming from what I knew was his bedroom. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to David and Sarah having an intimate conversation about their day. Not a roommate catch-up, but the kind of conversation married couples have about mundane daily experiences. Sarah was telling him about a work meeting. David was mentioning something about calling his mother back, and they were discussing plans for the weekend with a casual intimacy that made my blood run cold. Then I heard Sarah say something that made my entire world collapse. Should we tell Jessica soon? I feel terrible lying to her, and I'm worried she's getting too attached. Plus, my parents are asking when we're going to stop this charade and just live normally as a married couple. David's response shattered every assumption I'd held about our relationship. I know, but I'm not ready to hurt her yet. She's a good person, and this whole situation is my fault. I should have never started dating her when we were already married, but you and I were going through that rough patch, and I thought maybe we were over. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. We worked through our problems. David, we've been married for 4 years now, and we've been happy again for the past 2 years. This isn't fair to any of us, especially not to Jessica. I stood there, gripping the doorframe, as my entire relationship revealed itself to be an elaborate lie. David hadn't been my boyfriend for 3 years. He'd been a married man having an affair, and I'd been unknowingly participating in the deception of his wife, who had been kind to me, included me in their life, and even tried to help our relationship succeed. The most devastating part was realizing that Sarah had known all along. Every piece of advice she'd given me about David, every dinner we'd shared, every moment she consoled me when I felt insecure about our relationship, she'd been managing the situation while protecting her marriage. I quietly left the apartment and sat in my car for 2 hours, replaying every interaction, every inconsistency, every moment that should have revealed the truth. The business trips that Sarah knew too much about were probably romantic getaways they took together. The nights David couldn't spend with me were about needing space. He was with his wife. The compartmentalized feeling of our relationship was in different relationship styles. It was the structure of an affair. I didn't confront them that night. Instead, I went home and spent the next week processing the magnitude of what I'd discovered. I had been living a complete life for 3 years, but more than that, I had been an unwitting participant in deceiving myself. The hardest part wasn't just that David had betrayed me. It was that Sarah, whom I genuinely liked and trusted, had been managing this deception with what seemed like genuine care for my feelings. She hadn't been cruel or manipulative in an obvious way. Instead, she'd been protecting her marriage while trying to minimize my pain, which somehow made the betrayal feel more complex and devastating. I finally confronted David a week later, telling him I knew about his marriage. His reaction was everything I expected: shock, apologies, explanations about how it had just happened and how never meant for it to go on so long. He claimed he'd fallen into the situation and hadn't known how to get out without hurting everyone involved. But what struck me most was his assumption that I would somehow understand or forgive the situation because no one meant to hurt anyone. He genuinely seemed to believe that his good intentions and the complexity of the situation would somehow make the betrayal acceptable. Sarah reached out to me a few days later. She apologized and explained that she'd encouraged David multiple times to end our relationship but hadn't wanted to be the one to destroy my world. She said she'd hoped that by being kind to me and helping our relationship seem stable, David would eventually be honest with me himself. The strangest part of this entire experience was recognizing how much emotional labor everyone had put into maintaining this lie. David had been managing 2 relationships. Sarah had been managing her marriage while watching her husband date someone else. And I had been working to build a relationship that was never real to begin with. I realized that the something missing I'd always felt in our relationship wasn't about David being distant or uncommitted. It was about the fundamental impossibility of building something real on a foundation of lies. No matter how hard I tried, how understanding I was, or how much I loved him, I could never have what I thought I wanted because it never actually existed. The experience taught me that betrayal isn't always malicious. Sometimes people create elaborate situations to avoid hurting others, but end up causing more damage than if they'd just been honest from the beginning. David thought he was protecting me by not telling me about his marriage. But what he actually did was steal 3 years of my life and my ability to make informed decisions about my own relationships. Looking back, I wonder how many other people are unknowingly living in similar situations, investing in relationships that exist in completely different realities for the other person involved. How many people are giving their hearts to someone who's already given theirs to someone else, but just hasn't found the courage to be honest about it? The question that haunts me most isn't whether David ever really loved me. It asks whether love can ever be real when it is built on a lie that fundamental. And if you're in a relationship where something always feels missing, maybe the question isn't what's wrong with you or what more you could do. Maybe the question is, what isn't your partner telling you?